Good morning, everybody. I'm really encouraged that we've already had quite a lot of discussion of international opportunities. It makes my life very much easier. I think what I'd first best do is explain who the Department for International Trade are. We're the government organisation that's responsible for helping UK-based companies to export themselves, whether they be service providers or manufacturers of products. We were, up until about 18 months ago, known as UK Trade and Investment, so some of you may know us by that name, now Department for International Trade, and the service is delivered on a regional basis across the country, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about the specifics of the support, because that can vary from region to region, because there is a core government offering, and each region then bolts various programs onto it, depending upon what other funding they can leverage by the virtue of having the Department for International Trade contract. Good point, I think, to start with some thoughts about why a company just generically would want to export. I mean, the obvious one is if it's more profitable to do so. And I think one of the big questions that lots of companies don't ask themselves is this going to be a profitable exercise? Actually, just achieving sales isn't necessarily a good goal to be going after if you haven't thought about what extra costs something might entail, and is what you're going to do going to be profitable. Exporters generally are more innovative and more productive than non-exporters, so in itself, the fact that you're looking for international work does tend to drive behaviours within the company that make companies better companies. So in itself, it can be a good thing to do. And obviously reducing reliance on the UK market. The UK is quite a difficult market to do business in, and often demands a lot of innovation to satisfy UK clients. And what some companies don't realise is that actually skills sets that they have, which they're starting to think of as being a bit stale and old hat, may in other markets actually be exactly what that market is looking for. So it's a good, if you have some established skill sets that have served you well in the UK, one of the things we can do is try and find other markets where you can still get some value out of those skills, even if the UK market is starting to say, actually, lots of people are doing that, you're not very special. So don't ignore. Don't think that every market overseas is going to want cutting-edge services. They don't all want that, and they may not be able to afford the real cutting-edge services. Seasonality is another interesting thing to think about. If your practice finds that it's got peaks and troughs in the work it does, because what you do is driven by whether it's summer or winter, you can think about, well, what markets might we be able to sell our services to that balance out those peaks and troughs? I'm not an architectural expert, I have to confess, but we do find lots of sectors where this balancing of seasonality is a very important factor for considering working overseas. And one thing, lastly but not least, that companies often don't think about is actually, if you're an international company, you're a much more interesting place to work for people who want to develop their careers. So an international company does tend to attract higher quality employees than a company that's just deciding that the UK is where it's going to sit and that's it. Our role really, although we are more than happy to talk to companies that get inquiries from overseas and that have not actually done anything to create those inquiries, we're more than happy to talk to companies and help them find how they can fulfill overseas inquiries. What we're really about is turning companies from reactive exporters into proactive exporters, because it's great if you have skills that people are coming to you for, but if you're not controlling that process and they stop coming, you're stuffed. If you've actually identified what it is you've got that is special and that somebody might want to buy, we can then help you find markets and potential customers that want to buy that, and all of a sudden you're in charge of the process. It doesn't guarantee success, but it does put you in the driving seat rather than just being the recipient of good fortune. And actually, it's important for you as a company, if you're either exporting or thinking of exporting, to understand why you're doing it. Because if you're doing it because you quite like it and actually stuff's coming your way and you can pick and choose, there'll be a completely different mindset within your company from if you're in the position where you're going, you know what, the UK market isn't going to give us the growth we need. We're going to have to look overseas, and actually we need to devote the resources, time and effort to doing it that market demands. And from our perspective, export is not necessarily an easy route, and it's certainly not a short-term route. So from our perspective, to see companies that understand what's required, that are prepared to put in the time and effort and commitment to make it work, really backs up our efforts in the UK and the efforts of our overseas teams. So Department for International Trade, we've got sort of two faces really. In the UK, there are teams of advisors such as myself who are more than happy to come and talk to companies on a one-to-one basis, try and understand what you're all about, try and understand whether there are opportunities for you, try and help you prioritize markets if that's an issue, and then try and get you in front of international clients. The other side of our organisation are colleagues sat mainly in British embassies and consulates around the world, whose job it is to help British companies penetrate those markets. And what we do is, once we've got a handle on what you're all about, we then initiate conversations with those colleagues, ask them questions about whether what you're offering has a market where they're sat. And between us, we try and make the connections and get business happening. Most of the international trade advisors that are on the ground in the UK are ex-export sales managers. So they've got commercial experience. I can't guarantee that they will all understand how the architecture sector works, but in the early stages, actually, there isn't a huge amount of difference between us working with an architectural practice and lots of other service providers. And we do work with lots of companies that provide services. Our work is not typically about people that make products. More and more, it's about UK businesses that are offering services to clients overseas. And the basic principles about how you do it are fairly common across most sectors. So I've talked about the international trade advisors on the ground in the UK and our overseas networks. And our overseas networks are there to find you partners, if that's the way you want to work. They're a way to find you clients, if that's the way you want to work, by a direct approach to an overseas client. And they're also all about trying to find out what requirements there might be in those markets that might be barriers or things that you need to understand. We also, our London team also has various sector-specific exercises, exhibitions, conferences that they organise, and the 5 that I've put up there are the ones you'll probably recognise. So one of the things to be thinking about is, do I need to be there? If you do, there is support from government to help towards the costs of attending those shows, and the trade body that organises those is the person that you should contact and ask, is there space for us? What support is there for us to be there? Key markets as far as the UK government is concerned: USA, China, Hong Kong, Macau, India. But on the ground, we're interested in talking to you about any markets that you might have interest from or be interested in. There is some support for if companies that are involved in big projects where there's funding required up front. UK Export Finance is a sister organisation to ours. If banks are not willing to finance things like performance bonds or the cash flow required before practices get their first payment, we can initiate conversations with our colleagues at UK Export Finance to see if there's a government solution to that. I did mention that the regional offers vary, and obviously you're not all here from the southwest. If you're here from the northern powerhouse area, there will be funding support for activities for you. In the southwest, we managed to obtain some EU finance prior to the Brexit vote. So in addition to the government funding, we do have some support for companies that are based in the southwest over and above the core government offer. Experience UK, if any of you are operating in what we call the experience economy, museums, art galleries, theme parks, you should have a look at experienceuk.org. It is a directory, both physical and online, for providers to the experience economy. You can get a free entry in the directory, and it's the directory that's used by our teams overseas when businesses come to them and say, we're looking for a British architect for a theme park. Who do you know? If you're in the directory, at least you're there, you're in front of them. Ready to export is always a tricky topic to talk about with companies. I have to be honest, it isn't for everyone because it does require commitment and investment. And it's a long-term process. But if it's something that you think is absolutely key to your development, or if you've got inquiries and actually you're just stumped for how you deal with them, please make contact with your local Department for International Trade team, and we'll do our absolute best to help you through what can be a maze. Thank you.